So, day 4 of the war between Israel and the Palestinians after the Palestinian regime of Hamas invaded Israel on Saturday morning. And I just want to give you a few thoughts on what is going on. But first, I just want to give a little bit of a roundup of where we are today as I record this on Tuesday morning. So just a couple of things. You guys can get all of the updates on what's happening on the ground from jihadist.org from our breaking news coverage. But in the meantime, just broadly speaking, we did call up 300,000 reservists, and the Air Force is pounding Gaza with a tempo and an intensity of bombing that we haven't previously seen. They were bombing, I think, in South Gaza and in Central and North Gaza all of yesterday, and taking out some of the key neighborhoods where a lot of the leadership of Hamas live, and they're getting ready for the ground invasion. So a lot of plans have been pushed out there. Prime Minister Netanyahu said last night essentially that what we're going to be doing in Gaza and in general is going to change the face of the Middle East, and that the Hamas's ability to make war against us will be destroyed. So we'll have to see what that means. Basically, what it means, I think there's no way of doing it. From my 2 cents is that there's no way of doing it without reconquering Gaza and staying there, not leaving. We're not mowing the lawn anymore. We're taking over. We're uprooting the grass, and we're gonna plant trees or something. Anyway, for lack of a better metaphor that comes to mind right now, in the north, Hezbollah, Iran, the Iranian militias in Syria are stepping up their actions. The last report that I saw from this morning is that the Air Force identified in the Northern Command drones in the air in the skies around the Golan Heights in the Upper Galilee, Hezbollah drones. So they were, I didn't hear that they were shot down. I assume that was the plan. Otherwise, why would they mention it? And there were reports that sorry, I forgot to turn off my phone, but there were reports that Hezbollah is actually planning on mounting its ground offensive against Israel from the Golan Heights, that the Radwan Brigade of Hezbollah, which is their senior terrorists, are massing on the border in the Golan Heights, probably. Or in some reports, according to some reports, that they're also being augmented or joined by the Iranian Shiite militias that have been fighting in Syria and sitting in Syria for the past few years, as part of the Iranian, Hezbollah, Russian operation that saved the Assad regime. I also saw a report this morning that Assad and his family have been placed in hiding. Since he's not really the leader of Syria, it doesn't really matter because there is no real country named Syria. It's just an area of operations of Iran against Israel, just like Lebanon is and just like Gaza is. So it's possible that the attack is going to be coming from the Golan Heights. It's possible that it'll be coming from the Upper Galilee, as I think I've said before on these updates. Again, my 2 cents is that the side that should be opening up in a major way the northern front is not Hezbollah, Iran, it is Israel. And we should be setting the conditions for the war that is already upon us. Last night, we lost the deputy brigade commander of the Druze brigade in the Northern Command. He was killed, and 6 of his soldiers were wounded in an exchange of fire with Hezbollah terrorists who had penetrated Israel. And I think 4 Hezbollah terrorists were killed in that exchange. And there were mortar rounds fired off from Lebanon into Israel, attacking or targeting 2 bases in the Northern Command. So I think that it's fairly clear that this is already a 2-front war. Hamas just announced about an hour before I started my filming that they're going to start executing hostages in front of a camera because Israel has not stopped its bombing. Last night they said that they would start killing hostages if Israel continued its bombing. And now they say they're carrying out their threats. The truth is that it's just as possible that they'll carry out a threat now as it is that it's already been carried out. I mean, I think there's every reason to believe the Washington Post itself, not a paragon of authenticity, but or objectivity, but all the same, the Washington Post reported on Monday morning that their forensic analysis of photographs from Gaza with the hostages, that 4 at least that they saw were murdered in Gaza after being taken captive to Gaza. So given that we already know, and I saw footage as well of a woman who was pulled out of the back of a armored carrier after an Israeli woman, after she'd clearly been raped, and she was pushed into the back seat of the armored personnel carrier and then apparently shot. So that was already something that seemed fairly apparent, but that seems to be happening. So I think there's every reason to take their claims that they're going to start killing hostages now with a grain of salt, because I think that many of them are probably already dead. The count of the dead and the Israelis that were killed on Saturday has risen to above 900 and probably going to reach 1,000. And one of the problems with identifying the dead is that they were burned alive, many of them, and they're unidentifiable except through DNA. It's easier for Israel to figure out the identities of the IDF soldiers who were murdered in this way than it is for them to identify the civilians, because when young men and women are inducted into the service, the IDF takes DNA samples of them, but it's harder to locate on civilians, presumably. So that's what happened. Obviously, the reports of the atrocities that were carried out on Saturday just continue to stream in. I think one of the things that's very clear, and I pointed this out in an interview that I gave to the Sean Hannity radio show yesterday, is that what we're facing is Hamas. And it was always interesting in the past couple of decades of Hamas missile assaults and bus bombings and all the rest of it that they've been doing, that there was a sense that Hamas, for some reason, was more moderate than Al-Qaeda or than ISIS. And what we're seeing now is it simply isn't true. It's a question of opportunity and a question of capabilities, because what Israel suffered on Saturday in the south at the hands of Hamas was actually it was absolutely worse than anything that ISIS ever did in front of cameras. The behavior of the terrorists who penetrated Israel, the massacres, the slaughter, the killing fields that they opened up at the dance party in the Negev, in the desert, and in the kibbutzim that they reached, and in Ofakim and in Sderot, that these were in fact even worse than what ISIS has done. And of course, one of the important things that the Trump administration did was that it carried out a war that effectively ended ISIS as a fighting force in Iraq and to a large degree in Syria as well. So they went all the way there to do it, and so Israel certainly has to do it here at home. But that's the nature of the enemy that Israel is facing. It's as cruel and as brutal and as monstrous as the worst of the jihadists that we've seen in Iraq, in Syria, in Mumbai, in Pakistan, and in other countries, and at the Bataclan nightclub in Paris and other places. There's no difference. They're driven by the same genocidal ideology, and here it's even more brutal because the people that they hate the most in the world are the Jews. And so we've seen that. And then, I want to talk a little bit about how this is playing out abroad. Initially when all of this started, I wasn't paying attention to what was happening abroad because who has time, who has bandwidth for it? And I just sort of started noticing and paying attention to what was going on in the West in response to the attacks, I think probably yesterday. It's pretty extraordinary. Usually you see that when you have a major terrorist attack in the United States and Europe, and even when they're truly horrible in Israel, you have terrorists and their supporters, or the supporters of the Islamist terrorists from Islamist groups in the West and from socialist groups in the West, is very tepid or quiet. That there's a hiatus in the or in the pro-Islamist actions, demonstrations by these organizations for a few days until the dust settles. And what I found really notable this time was that there was no such hiatus. The slaughter took place here on Saturday, and of course this attack is orders of magnitude greater than anything that we've seen in Israel, and it's really orders of magnitude greater than we've seen anywhere in the Western world for the past several years. And as Minister Ron Dermer has made mention of on several of his press appearances in recent days, from just the perspective of the number of casualties here or dead here to the overall population of Israel, which is a 40th of the population of the United States, this would be as if this is a casualty rate of 1,000. That's 30. I think you said 20 times higher than what America experienced on 9/11 as a percentage of the population. So, this is an enormous thing, and you would have thought that given the brutality and given the footage that's coming out of Gaza, that there would have been a hiatus, but that's not what happened. The progressive socialists, whatever you want to call them, the revolutionary socialists in the United States that are aligned with the Democrat Party didn't miss a beat. The Democrat Socialists of America organized pro-Hamas rallies along with Islamist groups like American Muslims for Palestine and Samidun, which has been exposed as an arm of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine terrorist organization. AMP is aligned with Hamas, and they started demonstrations in support of Hamas in 40 different places throughout the United States, beginning the next day, beginning on Sunday. There was one outside of the White House, and JNS has covered these things, but it's amazing to me that they didn't wait. And the same thing in Europe. And a notable one was in Australia, because it was caught on film in a pretty amazing way, where you had a couple thousand, I think, Islamists standing outside of or next to the Sydney Opera House, which had been illuminated in blue and white to show solidarity with Israel. And they were screaming, "F the Jews, gas the Jews, gas the Jews, gas the Jews." And one of the most notable aspects of this, and this happened as well in Canada, is that the police didn't take action against these open supporters of genocide and mass slaughter and jihad against Jews. And at the same time, they blocked Jews from approaching with Israeli flags. The Daily Mail had footage of one Jewish man carrying an Israeli flag that he didn't even have a chance to unfurl, carted away by Australian police and placed under arrest. And none of the demonstrators calling for Jews to be annihilated, gas the Jews, F the Jews, etc., were arrested. So that the Jews were placed under curfew or under arrest. Oh, they also they instructed the Jewish community of Sydney not to come near the demonstration. So these people were protected by the Sydney police, and the Jews were told to stay away and not express themselves and not to oppose these people calling for them to be annihilated. And I found that amazing. But I mean, similar things are happening throughout the West. There was a Support Israel rally that Ezra Levant from Rebel News tweeted about earlier today that I retweeted on my account, where he said that the Canadian police in Toronto had cordoned off a small area where Jews were holding a pro-Israel protest, and you couldn't get there. So he wanted to join the protest, and he couldn't even come to the demonstration. It wasn't a protest, it was a demonstration. So that people were blocked from supporting Israel. While these Israel is not anti-Israel. These are these pro-genocide, pro-Hamas rallies are taking place unopposed by police forces in these Western, ostensibly open, liberal societies in the United States, where supporting terrorism, providing material support for terrorism, and things of that nature are illegal. So this is pretty remarkable. And I asked myself a question: why did this happen? How do they feel so emboldened? And part of it is because they feel emboldened by what Hamas did. They're happy to see the mass rape and humiliation of Jewish women and men, and the abuse of Jewish children, the massacre of Jewish children, and parents, and soldiers, obviously. There have also been eyewitness accounts of beheadings. Again, this is just like ISIS, but it's Hamas, and we shouldn't call it ISIS. It's the Palestinians. It's Palestinian society. And as these Israelis are being paraded down the streets, the crowd is cheering. So this isn't as though there's not a supportive society behind these things. There is. So all of these things are happening. And the question is, how is it being so openly supported in the West? And the answer is not just that they feel emboldened by what Hamas did, that they feel that they're on the march, although that's true. It's also that they're emboldened at home. So, for instance, there are 6 members of Congress in the squad. All of them are members of the Democratic Socialists of America. Okay, so and then 2 more members of the squad are supported by, one is a former member, and the other one is this jihadist reported, and the other one is simply supported by the Democratic Socialists of America. And these are very, very powerful people in Congress, and they have the back of the DSA. They also have the back of American Muslims for Palestine. And this brings us to the Biden administration. So on the one hand, it's wonderful, the support that President Biden has professed for Israel, and that America is sending us a lot of ammunition, a lot of missiles, I think, for Iron Dome that are obviously going to run out. We absorbed 5,000 missiles in 24 hours, 3,500 just on Saturday morning, I think is what the count was, and then Hezbollah in the north. So, our factories are operating 24/7, but the Americans are the main production hub of those missiles, and so I know they're doing that. And the USS Gerald Ford aircraft carrier group is on its way to the Eastern Mediterranean as well to support. So that's great. But it's really notable that there seems to be a bifurcation of the Biden administration between the people on the top, who, like Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary, and even Tony Blinken, on and off as Secretary of State, and the president himself, who are expressing full-throated support for Israel, and the people underneath them. And a lot of it's been said, a lot of it's been written about the initial reaction of the U.S. Embassy here. The Palestinian Affairs Department put out a tweet while people were still being slaughtered in the South, calling for both sides to restrain themselves. And that tweet was taken down later. Secretary of State posted a tweet yesterday that I related to on my Twitter page, where he said that he had spoken to his Turkish counterpart and applauded Turkey's efforts to reach a ceasefire. So how can you on the one hand recognize that Israel has to defeat Hamas, and on the other hand say that you want a ceasefire that will leave Hamas in place with a massive strategic victory over the Jewish people? Not just the Jewish state, because what they've been doing is clearly anti-Jewish, and it's emboldening anti-Semites, and jihadists, and communist-type Jew haters throughout the Western world. So I think, when you look at this, you say, how do you explain the split? And I think, the problem is that the Biden administration itself it has people who know how to talk as centrists and maybe are, I don't know. But all of these staff positions in the Middle East policy shop, such as it is in the Biden administration, whether it's Mahar Bitar, who is the director of intelligence at the National Security Council, or the envoy for the Palestinians in the State Department, and so many others in the government who are simply terrorist supporters. They have a record of supporting Palestinian terrorism against Israel that predates their joining the Biden administration. So these people's instincts is to support Hamas. And they are the ones that are populating the analysis wings and the policy shops where they're supposed to implement the policies that President Biden and his top level officials are putting forth, but they're ideologically opposed to that. So I think, that's one. And I'll just give you a really sort of notable example from yesterday, which is that the National Security Council spokesman, John Kirby, was interviewed by Jake Tapper on CNN, and everybody's shown the footage where he starts choking up after Tapper asked him, how does the administration respond to the footage that's coming out of the slaughter and the rape and the abuse, the child abuse, etc. And he sort of choked up before he gave some answer. It was like, oh, it's terrible, it's really hard, which was nice. I mean, I shouldn't shake my head. So nice. But his deputy spokesman was on the Rachel Maddow show last night, and he was much different in tone and said that the United States expects Israel to abide by international law in its operations in Gaza. It's like, so what's going on here? Are these crocodile tears? Who is calling the shots? Who is the spokesperson for the National Security Council? And, I think that this war was enabled by two different things. And we can go into this maybe more deeply another time. But it was enabled by this Western love for dead Jews. Darrell Horn wrote a fantastic book called "Everyone Loves Dead Jews," and it's spot on. And there's this immediate sympathy for Israelis when when we're victimized, when our human rights are trampled, when we're treated like we were by the Nazis. Everybody, is so sad to see, what's happening. But then there's this hatred for courageous Jews, for free Jews, for Jews who stand up for themselves and their rights and fight for their country. Then we automatically see, well, you better abide by international law, you there, Mr. Jew guy. And, so I think that that's at play, and that's been at play for a really long time because starting in 9/11, the Palestinian terrorist war against Israel began a year before 9/11 in September 2000. And there was an expectation here that when America was attacked on September 11th, that George Bush would see that the Palestinian terror war against Israel was part of a global jihad that was expressed on 9/11 by Al-Qaeda's attack on the United States, that it's just a different front in the same war. But George Bush decided not to do that. He said that, first of all, he refused to declare war on militant Islam. Condoleezza Rice barred the study of the jihadist doctrine by the U.S. government in 2005. And they went out of their way to hide the nature of the enemy by declaring war on terror. And then on September 20th, 2001, in Bush's speech declaring his war on terror, he said that the United States was at war against all terrorist organizations with global reach, which was a clear decision to leave out the terrorism against the Jews. And that was sort of a very clear statement by the United States that they don't expect to be, they don't view Israel as an ally in this fight. Israel is something else. We're sui generis and we're a problem, which is why immediately after September 11th, the Bush administration, I think it was in November, came out for the first time in U.S. history openly supporting the establishment of a Palestinian state, even though at the time and since and previously there has never been a Palestinian organization that is not a terrorist organization. So you've never had a situation where the Palestinians ever had a credible claim to governing or to a support from the United States and from these other Western governments that are supposedly fighting these forces of evil. And the reason, again, is clear, because people love dead Jews and not so much alive ones that are courageous. And I think that this is a very important thing. And the other one that you see really is this collapse of Western confidence, self-confidence, and the morality of Western civilization. And, obviously we see this coming out very clearly on the left. I think it's notable that I think it was 31 student organizations at Harvard came out with a joint declaration of support for Hamas, for the Palestinians, on Sunday. And, you see that there is, how could this be? How can these very bright young Americans be siding with genocidal, bloodthirsty, misogynist, whatever, all of the lingo that they use to pretend that they're more moral than the rest of us, all of the things they purportedly oppose, Hamas embodies, and it embodied on Saturday and on Sunday and on Monday and on and previously. How can they stand in solidarity with them? And the answer is because Westerners have turned against themselves. The only way that a student at Harvard can come up with this kind of idea, and the same thing happened at Columbia, my two alma maters, by the way, is because they've been instructed, they've been brainwashed to believe that there's something fundamentally wrong with Western civilization, with the Jewish people, with the Judeo-Christian roots of their way of life, and to prefer the way of life, apparently, of people who hate them and want to enslave them and humiliate them and kill them. And so I think that those two twin forces of hostility towards Jews and to the concept of Jewish power, and as a result to Israel itself, and the collapse of the self-confidence of the West are really what are enabling like-minded jihadists and communist revolutionaries in the United States to feel emboldened to stand up on behalf of Hamas the day after the mass murder, the slaughter in southern Israel. And I'll just end here with, events like this usually give us clarity, right? I mean, there was clarity after 9/11, true. Bush took it and made it unclear and made the waters more murky for his reasons, and we won't get into them now. But people of the world, the good people of the world, understood what was at stake in 9/11. And then, led by President Bush in many ways and Tony Blair and others at the time, they pushed away from it, and they pretended that we could coexist and cut a deal with the Taliban or just run away, as Biden did 20 years later. And everything would be fine, or as Obama tried to do in Iraq in 2011, only to see ISIS crop up and seize large swaths of Iraq and Syria. So, all of these ideas then came to Israel, and the Israeli national security elite was infected by them, which led to this whole concept that we could have a border with a jihadist regime at our doorsteps and not have to be concerned about a scenario like Saturday's ever happening. And obviously that was wrong, but it was influenced by the cross-exchange of bad ideas and the influence that people purveying these stupid ideas in the West have on Israel's own elites, particularly our national security elites. So, sometimes I feel like we've just tied ourselves in so many knots that there's no way for us to free ourselves from what we've done to ourselves. I think that in Israel, those knots are being untied. There are some holdouts, like the former Mossad director, Dani Yatom, was on the BBC this morning saying that the attack happened because of Netanyahu and his judicial reform, and that other people like that on the foreign news saying similar things, and even on Israeli news and getting away with it. So there are a lot of bitter enders there, but I think broadly speaking, when we see the way that Israelis across the spectrum are coming together to fight Hamas, we are extricating ourselves. But in order to win this, we have to really walk away from these knots. We have to cut them and see clearly what we're facing, because this is a do or die minute for Israel. And I know where the public stands on this. It's very clear. And I just hope that the IDF general staff, led by Netanyahu and its others, come into the government to form an emergency government, and then them as well, will have the clarity to understand Israel has to abolish the Hamas regime, not just as a fighting force, but as a coherent force in any kind in Gaza. And the expectation should be that the West look at this and realize that the survival of Western civilization and the regeneration of Western civilization is very much tied up with the moral decisions that the people of the West make today. Are they really going to allow, under the rubric of freedom of speech or whatever, to have people screaming out death to the Jews on the streets of their cities, and then see Jews carted away and ghettoized lest we actually, rumple their feathers too much? Or are you going to stand up for truth and for goodness and for humanity in the face of these atrocities being carried out here by jihadists and supported by jihadists in your own countries? And then finally, obviously, it's a question for American Jews and diaspora Jewry in general. I think it's been clear for a long time, but it's clear more now than ever, that the survival, the security, the well-being of all Jews outside of Israel is entirely wrapped up with Israel. The more powerful Israel is and is perceived to be, the more secure Jews are around the world. And that has to be a lesson to Jewish leaders who have been treading so carefully of late and wondering how they should come down and whether it's okay to be controversial, that is, completely and utterly supportive of Israel and completely and utterly rejecting the Palestinians and their genocidal war and claims and never-ending claims against the Jews, not because they want a state, not because they want justice, but because they want injustice and annihilation of the Jewish people, not only in Israel, but as Hamas wrote in its charter, throughout the world. So this is a moment of decision for everybody, all good-thinking people. We understand the causes of what brought on this war, what's emboldening Hamas, what's emboldening Hamas's supporters abroad, and now we simply have to make a decision. Are we going to stand for this or not? Because if we do stand for it, we won't be around to change our mind later on. Thanks very much. I'm Isla.